Uber shuts down self-driving truck program. We have the August economic roundup, and freight markets are still cooling, but history says not for long. Federal standards or states' rights, making sense of Denham and Dynamex. And finally, key takeaways from Stifel's deep dive on trade war risk. I'm JP.
And I'm Chad.
And we talk about all these issues and more on this week's episode of What the Truck.
JP, you guys really held it down last week.
Welcome back, dude.
Oh.
How was Colorado?
Like another country. It was so beautiful.
Really?
Felt like I was in Switzerland. I've only been in Switzerland once, but man, it's just like I loved it. It was beautiful.
You're up in like Breckenridge.
I did go there a couple of times to mountain bike, ride one of those gondolas. Different form of transportation. I'm always doing field research for the podcast.
I see. Of course.
Yeah, it was so great. And what I wanted to say was, while I cleared my head and had a wonderful time and saw lots of trucks on the road, and
tell us about those.
Tried to educate my children on I Spy which carrier.
I'm so proud of you.
It gets in you. But I came back and I feel super rejuvenated. Really missed you guys, and it's great to be back.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you back, dude.
Thanks, and so much so that I have. Again, if you can't lick them, you join
converted
them.
To the dark side. if you only saw the power.
The Bell's Too Hard a Dale going down 2 gullets right now.
Nice.
But here's one nice thing I want to say about Bell's Too Hearted. Sometimes it's the simpler approach that that wins out amongst the mini pallets, because, and this is seriously, one hops, Centennial hops is all they got in here,
Nice.
and a solid
Hippity
malt body to make a very fun American IPA. I get it. All right. Anyway, this is quite delicious. Great to be here with you.
Well, glad that you've joined.
It's not as hoppy as a Colorado beer. I mean, like an IPA, but you know what? That's not necessarily a bad thing, because they get busy. Speaking of busy, we have had busy times in the FreightWaves office and busy headlines on the week.
Growing rapidly, adding people every week, and publishing lots of news. Why don't we get into it?
Well, we led off the week with some kind of surprising and unusual news. We learned that Uber Freight seemed to be shutting down.
No. So our Renegade field correspondent Matt Wimberly reported on news that Uber was ending its self-driving trucks program,
and speculated upon even
on the implications for Uber Freight. Basically, the digital freight brokerage that Uber is starting.
Right. That's how we led off our week. And what happened after that?
It was really interesting. So he was kind of saying, Wimberly was saying, look, if Uber is going to get into trucking and have basically an on-demand autonomous carrier, nothing like the world has ever seen before, that makes complete sense. That could be massively profitable. They'll be printing money. That's a huge boost to the whole company. But
if that could be executed, that vision,
since they're ending the self-driving truck program, Uber Freight is essentially just another brokerage. And freight brokerages trade at about 10 to 12 times EBITDA. Tech startups, software...
Easy for you to say.
Software as a SaaS... software as a service companies tend to trade at like 15 to 20 times EBITDA. And we know that Uber is looking to do an IPO next year.
Yeah.
So basically, if Uber Freight, as just a normal brokerage, is attached to them, it's really going to drag their valuation down.
Possibly.
Because it doesn't have that autonomous, bigger play.
Wasn't that the speculation?
It was the speculation, and so he was sort of
hit
saying,
a nerve of sorts.
He was saying, "What's the point of Uber Freight?"
Yeah,
and we ran that story, and what do you know? Uber Freight is calling us in the morning. To be fair,
They were super cool.
To be fair, they're a very large, busy company, as you alluded to, and they haven't really had the time of, they haven't had time for us at all yet, even though we've been trying to get them on the phone for months. So it was, nice that they reached out to us. They wanted to talk to us. They wanted to sort of tell their side of the story. And
and they clarified it.
Mariah and I were on the call.
Yes.
She reported. It was pretty interesting.
It was.
They made some decent points. I don't think they really had the authority to disclose the numbers that would have actually been able to contradict Wimberly's thesis. They couldn't, for example, say like what the
I
net.
see what you're saying.
They couldn't say like what the net revenue of Uber Freight was or anything like that.
Sure,
but they did have some
And
interesting.
it was good of you to ask those questions. I'm proud of you for trying.
Yeah, it was cool.
I want to just add that a part of the thing that I did take away that seemed legit to me was just that they're saying specifically that this is not our strategy. We are not. We're just taking out the self-driving cars right now.
But we're
keeping.
They're keeping the self-driving cars, taking out the self-driving trucks.
They're taking out the self-driving trucks,
right?
But they're continuing with Uber Freight itself.
Yeah. And they sort of said it's the same concept.
And they say it's doing quite well, right?
Yeah. They're growing their volumes of loads quickly. We suspect that they're also accelerating the amount of money from moving from Uber to Uber Freight at a roughly similar pace. We don't know about margins and profitability and net revenues or anything like that.
Right.
But what's interesting is they said two things really. They said number one, we wanted to do for freight what Uber already does for personal conveyance. Yes. So you tap a phone. You push a button, and you get a load covered, or you find a ride. And they said that we do offer that service. It's executing its mission. And secondly, they said to be competitive as a digital freight brokerage right now, we don't need autonomous trucks. Like that's a distraction. It's an incredibly complicated technology that we were it was dragging from the actual profitability of the digital freight brokerage business. They're sort of bullish on their software capabilities and what that can bring to the table, without having to go down the whole road of an autonomous truck. So, they said that, it made sense. It didn't really, they couldn't really talk about the IPO next year or anything like that. But it was a good conversation, and it was good to kind of establish a working relationship with them, which I think ultimately will help us learn more about the company faster as they continue to develop.
Okay.
So it was good.
Yeah.
So check out Mariah Baker's article on what Uber had to say.
I thought it was a good, pretty succinct clarification, and I totally agree with you that it's great to begin having a conversation with them and all they're doing, and I think that their prospects are still quite high. I think that there's an adjustment period that's happening, right?
Yeah. I mean,
sometimes less is more.
We know that they can
addition
deliver
by subtraction.
Say what you will about Uber's, whatever their ethics, former executives, their sort of kind of battered image in the public sphere. They deliver an amazing product. Pretty much everyone who's ever used them knows that.
Right.
So,
they dominate.
So people,
sector.
They're always going to command a certain level of respect and attention, from the media. So we're excited to work with them closer.
I'm excited, and that was great coverage, man. Good job with that interview. What would you like to tackle next? The weekly market update before we talk about the monthly?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and go to some of Zach Strickland's material.
One of the things that I love about this time of year, JP, is is the very thing that we led off with, how it's vacation time sometimes at this time of year, you know?
Yep.
It's, the only exciting thing happening in logistics is Prime Day by Amazon. It's a slower, and they specifically, strategize that because it's like the slowest time in between times now.
That's what our theory was. And, it's true that July is the preferred month for Americans to take vacation by decent margin.
Right. As I think Strickland writes, and the Sultan writes, he says, according to Gallup, July is the most popular month to take a summer vacation. 55% of those surveyed said they were planning on taking a summer vacation, with 51% stating July was the month. So what about it? Historically, what's happening at this time while Americans are enjoying perhaps their the fruits of their economic production and labor?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's what happens.
Think slow.
Think slow. I mean, most of the stuff that people have to buy in stores to prepare them to celebrate the summer are in the stores, by late May and June, right? And so during the actual period of vacation and travel and things like that,
while they're consuming,
there's a big falling off actually of demand for freight, and it happens every year. It's really interesting. Zach and I went back and looked at this new DAT final report, daily final report index, and we looked at the lane between LAX and Dallas.
That's right. That was in your reporting about the softening.
Yeah, and we found that
in general.
So spot prices declined through the month of July in every the past 5 years.
Okay.
And we were looking at what we wanted to know is, when does it start coming back?
Yeah.
Right? Like when do brokers and shippers and carriers know that the market's turning around? And I think the past 5 years, the date for the bottom of this falling off before the rise was like August 6th, August 7th, August 9th, August 11th, and August 23rd.
Over the past 5 years.
Over the past 5 years. So it looks
sometimes
most of it's
long softening, all the way up until late August.
Yeah, but four out of the past 5 years within the first half of August.
Wow, well, that's very interesting. So it's been soft for about what would you say, like a week or week and a half?
No, it's been declining for all of July.
All of July,
and it does that every year, and it reaches a bottom in the first half of August.
It seems like I feel like it.
And then,
I thought it,
and then accelerates.
Yeah, it's like super. Yeah,
and I have to say, I was on an earnings call last night. Hub Group, big intermodal transportation provider. They're still they handle a lot of business, from Asia to the West Coast through the U.S.
Okay.
And talking to all of their big box retailer customers, are predicting a very strong fall peak season.
Oh yeah.
So I think they're basically saying that
no real surprise.
Well, what was interesting is they're saying that the tariffs have really had no effect yet on volumes.
Now, originally we were thinking that's because they were like trying to get them in under the deadline, but they're still is my understanding that they're still. So
the tariffs will have an effect.
Yeah,
they're not having an effect on volumes. It may mean. So that means it'll be one of two things. It'll be the shippers, the manufacturers are eating, the extra cost increase, or they're passing it down to the consumer. So those will be the two effects. Yeah. But right now it hasn't. The important.
In fact, that's part of your Roundup analysis.
The important part is it hasn't hurt the ability of American companies to source imports.
Right. Not so far.
Yeah.
We haven't had the downward cycle of that happening. It's soft. But I think the Sultan has been predicting 2 to 3 weeks of this, and it's going to start tightening right back up. So we'll see what it provides.
It'll be interesting, and that'll be the really risky time for brokers to be quoting spot loads, because it's hard to time that uptick exactly right, and you don't want to get caught in a position where you have to cover these loads and the spot market's outrunning you.
What do you think? What do you make of what the Sultan was also talking about, though, in the softening? He was saying, however, Chicago is sort of an anomaly right now.
Yeah.
What was the takeaway there of why do we think that it's happening there in this isolated part of the country that is a bit of an anomaly nationwide?
I don't really know. I mean, I think that one possible thesis is that even though all the ports have been showing like record volumes, kind of in May and June and that kind of thing.
Maybe it's the finished,
the trucks have been servicing those. So
through LA to Dallas to distributing throughout the country.
But the idea is that like we know that LA has had really large volumes come in, yet downturns in LA have declined. It must mean that
I remember you wrote about that.
It must mean that they're getting sufficient capacity. So the port cities are sucking up all the trucks out of the middle of the country. And that's why you're seeing turndowns in Chicago.
Tightening up.
In the middle of the country in
Heating
Chicago.
up. That's a good theory. I like it. I buy it. The Sultan himself did not posit an exact scenario, just kind of looked at year over year seasonality patterns and a nice weekly update. Everybody should check that one out. We also have a monthly economic update from Ibrahim.
Yeah, our chief economist Ibrahim Bayan, came through with
a
roundup
comprehensive report
of all of the government data coming out this month.
We just had one of the strongest quarters since the Great Recession.
Yeah, in terms of GDP growth.
Yeah,
4.1%.
That's awesome, right? In a way, but what could too high a growth of GDP mean? The Sultan was just telling us about this.
Yeah, I think like inflation, right?
Yeah, it's like if it heats up too much, you're not really gaining. You're going in
you're
so
spending
high
more,
that inflation
you're
begins to
spending
happen
more
against
without
the wages.
getting more. And so that was interesting. Like
I think that is the way that bottom line.
For
happens.
example, the kind of thing he's talking about is that in the Stifel trade war risk roundup, they said it's unlikely that a trade war with China will end up reshoring manufacturing to the U.S. simply because the U.S. already has a blue-collar labor shortage. We don't have the people to ramp up a bunch of it.
I hadn't heard it really quite put that way.
To rapidly grow manufacturing capacity, just like we don't have the people to rapidly grow trucking capacity. And so when the economy is growing quickly, but there's no real, again, capacity being added, it just means that things are like costing more and people are spending more money.
Yeah,
prices
exactly.
are rising.
That's how that's a very detailed and look at the very thing you just asked me.
We see it with, JB Hunt, for example, saying that their intermodal volumes went up 4%. Intermodal volumes went up 4%.
Okay.
Revenue went up, 14%. How did that happen? Oh, because they're charging more of everything. So that's kind of what growth looks like when you're already kind of maxed out.
Yeah.
Well,
that is interesting, and that's insightful. I think that's how it works. However, I do think that there were so the overall economic roundup of Ibrahim's is that he's looking at, and things just seem solid throughout most sectors of our economy right now.
Industrial production actually did rise 3.8%.
So he's not worried. He thinks that the slight softening that we're going to feel in the third quarter is not even going to really be a correction,
right?
Just because it's going to be a natural, still sustained strength, just maybe not as overheated in the particular measurement of the way it was in the second quarter.
Yeah, we got a couple of like artificial boosts from international trade when people try to beat tariff deadlines or whatever,
as we just mentioned.
And I think also if you're paying attention to year over year numbers, the comps get tougher in the back half of 2018 because that's really when the second half of 2017 is when we entered into the bull market that we're in right now. So those were already elevated numbers.
It's going to be hard to beat the year over year of that.
Yeah. But even if it's positive at all, and the intermodal people I've talked to said that they're looking to do positive growth margins even year over year in the third and fourth quarters. We're looking at a very, very busy, active, constrained, and potentially volatile freight market going into the second half of 2018.
It may be volatile because they get so overmaxed that they simply cannot move the volume.
Right, and then you get
and
into
that may very well happen with rail, as I understand.
Yeah. We've had some visitors in the office, people involved really deeply embedded in intermodal, who have basically they've suggested that the west to east intermodal capacity of Union Pacific and BNSF is basically maxed out. That there's no more spillover from trucking to rail like there could be. The rails they've already committed to moving as many loads as they possibly can, and now they're just basically tacking on surcharges just because they can. So I think at one point Union Pacific was like, okay, well, we're just going to add an extra $200 to a bunch of boxes.
Wow. So
the implications for trucking is that when this peak season hits, and people are saying that it's following the 2017 trend of arriving early and having a pretty long tail.
Yeah.
When that hits, the implications for trucking are that prices could be all over the place.
Well, we will wait and see. Operators standing by. Another thing to cover that's interesting, not necessarily it happened this week. Actually, it happened on July 19th, so we're close to being on it. But the Western States Trucking Association, which we will now call the WSTA, filed a pretty big petition, a complicated thing, with the US DOT, asking this federal agency to intervene in the dispute over California's brake requirements, and the complicating part about the lawsuit, the thing that's interesting about it as well, is that it both challenges the California Supreme Court ruling regarding the owner-operator service known as Dynamex.
Interesting.
As well as touching on the Denham Amendment.
Right.
And, this is legal stuff. But I will say that the reason that we should at least just mention it is that, overall, we talk about kind of the year, and some petitions were filed in December. But for the most part, this is and I know these things have been persisting in the industry for a while, but the story of 2018 is that the trucking industry has operated for, basically 2018 under the shadow of two fundamental issues regarding federal standards versus state standards. And basically on the federal, it's the carriers protecting themselves from frivolous tort or lawsuits that are just attorneys glomming on to an issue on behalf of plaintiffs, them protecting their rights on the one, and independent truckers protecting their pay and rights on the other. Both these issues have emerged this year, and both, as we've talked about, from the heavyweight state of California.
Interesting.
And I guess basically, the Denham Amendment, this is the interesting thing. Recently, in late April, it passed by a vote. It passed in the House by a vote of 222 to 193. 12 Republicans joined all the Democrats after Nancy Pelosi whipped them into...
Interesting.
Whipped them up with a big letter. And so now we're waiting to see what will happen in the Senate regarding the Denham Act. The carriers want the Denham Act to happen, essentially because it's going to normalize, standardize, streamline, federal regulation. As David Heller has put it, one of the spokespeople for the ATA, the ATA, he said. You cannot have a different rule. What if a driver goes through 3 states? There's a different rule in every state.
Yeah.
You can't be, liable for the rest periods of every single state that it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And there's sense to this. There's
I
logic
agree.
and reasoning to this point of view.
I agree. I mean, and if you look at the history of like nation states and regulations, if you look at like, you know, the U.S. moving from the Articles of Confederation to the U.S.
Ooh.
Constitution and like centralizing regulatory ability. If you look at like the first half of the 19th century in the German Confederation, they had like 35 little statelets,
Okay.
35 different customs, 35 different gauges of railroad. Like, it really,
Yeah, we couldn't have had a federal highway if everybody.
yeah,
had
it
a
really
rule,
hinders
right?
it really hinders
Yeah.
economic growth, and so
Yeah,
people realize
right.
that actually larger, more uniform regulatory environments in like
Yeah.
help economies grow faster.
Point made, and I don't think anybody disagrees with that. Really, I think what the other side is feeling, thinking, the owner operators, OOIDA, the Teamsters, a lot of independent truckers. What do they fear? The very broad language within that's tacked on to whatever bill that it gets appropriated
I
to,
see, yeah.
and they're afraid that it's going to like basically be a lot of unpaid lunch breaks and stuff. And I think that this is my point of view for them on this at this time is, of all times in the industry where there is a capacity crunch, where you're feeling super regulated, and where there's not enough of you to go around and you're demanding more pay,
And
then for regulation to be passed that might suppress your ability to get paid and have more options, I can understand the fear. I can understand that it seems like not an irrational fear. You know, I don't know. But so far as I understand, and okay, so that's just one part of the story.
We should probably balance that against the idea that like making trucking harder in California actually has a drag on the national economy and it increases
even just that one state. If
because like, you know, the majority of all of the goods imported into the U.S. come into California.
How many million people live in California? Is it 33? I'm just taking a wild.
Yeah, no,
it's
around
is
that.
it something like that?
Yeah, it's around that.
So that's one issue that we're dealing with. Waiting the final chapter in, and then also just the Dynamex decision is another thing that's just overlooking everything, and we're still waiting on some kind of a ruling to figure out what the clarification from the courts are going to be about this ABC test, which was only clarified for 5 paragraphs of an 86-page ruling.
Ooh.
Greg Fury of Scopelidis has
break this down for us.
He's defined the ABC test as just 3 bites of one apple. In other words, it's just one idea of which we're parsing, like the definition. This could have impacts on all kinds of litigation going on now, as well as like what does it mean about the past? What does it mean going forward?
Tell us what the issues at stake are here.
Well, do we want to deep dive and do it all right now? They had the California Supreme Court basically decided, upon hearing the Dynamex ruling about the independent contractors, they decided to dispense with a 30-year precedent that they had been abiding under called the Borello test, which I think overall the analysis, why did the court do that? The court seems to have done it probably just because of not liking the independent contractor model status and the way that it's being used. Right. So they took I think New Jersey uses the ABC test, and there's another state as well out in the Northeast that use it. And so they took it, but it's only 5 paragraphs. It's not super, and so everybody's waiting to hear.
I see.
Okay,
right.
That's the big thing that everybody's waiting to hear clarification about with the Dynamex ruling. It could have fallout for the gig economy, all kinds of startups, whether anybody using a contractor model. It's a big deal. So this little, let's hope it's big. This WTSA led, filing is trying to, There's other things going on, other fights. There's legislation. They're asking the governor to intervene against this Supreme Court ruling on behalf of all these businesses in California. So Whoa,
Very
that was a
interesting.
legal thing. Are there any other takeaways we have from your deep dive into the pudding pool of the trade war risk?
Yeah, that was really cool. Basically, all of Stifel's multimodal transportation equities analysts weighed in on this report together. They came together like Voltron. It was the trucking
I
guy.
like that.
It was the maritime shipping guy. It was the logistics guy. It was the railroad guy. It was the air guy, and they all finally did one huge report together. Very very cool. David Ross led the charge for trucking. Only two takeaways I want to share, really quickly. The first is that in order of mode, like which modes are most exposed to trade war risk.
Yes, I like that part of it.
First maritime, then railroad, then trucking, then air.
And why air? It's interesting. I mean, people wouldn't, normally know. Why,
Well, why
are they the least exposed?
Oh, because they have this sort of small, high value. Not really commodities, but more like finished goods that haven't really been targeted by the tariffs yet. The portion of maritime, the most exposed industry. The portion of maritime that's also most exposed is the dry bulk market. So people moving things that have to do with like steel production, like iron ore and coal, people moving grains, people moving soybeans, stuff like that.
That seems to have been clear from the very beginning of these tariffs.
Yeah, and so trucking, it's not that bad. Within the trucking space, they said that, people like JB Hunt and Hub Group are actually more exposed to risk because of their intermodal
play.
Yeah. So
JB Hunt's gotten really good at it, haven't they?
They have the biggest fleet of intermodal boxes by far in the U.S. Yeah.
Okay, I just constantly learn things.
So that's one of the takeaways. And the second one was that really for truckload moves, for truckload carriers, the risk is pretty indirect. The idea is that, eventually higher prices cause inflation, which suppress consumer demand and the economy. So it's like it will take, we're talking in the mid to long term for tariffs to really impact your typical domestic truckload carrier.
And I think one of the things that is how real are these things? Everybody's kind of going, are these permanent?
Exactly.
Like, is this just a toy? Is this a yo-yo? What's happening here?
Right.
Is it going to be another tweet and everything goes away? Like, what's? And
so companies have been really reluctant to undertake these expensive re-engineerings of their supply chains. For example, like if you had to move a factory from China to Vietnam, to avoid tariff.
Are you going to do that? There have been some moves like that made, right?
But I mean, people are kind of like, there's two barriers. There's one, Southeast Asia doesn't have the skilled workforce that even China has, and two, they don't know how permanent these tariffs are going to be. They don't know if they're just opening negotiating tactics. They don't know if what's going to happen with the political situation, if there'll be a reaction against this, either from Trump's own party or from the Democrats. So like, people are kind of holding fat. Like it's not really reshaping global trade so much as, again, some people are eating the costs and some people are passing it on to consumers.
And the very well publicized Harley Davidson moving out of the U.S. And then also it seemed like there was a temporary, speaking of high value things, like there was a temporary thing of like, wait a minute, like European imports of cars are going to be tariffed.
Right.
And everybody's freaking out.
Don't they already cost enough?
Yes. And then though, like, hasn't there recently been some back and forth with the EU and maybe everything will be okay and that won't really happen? So that's kind of my, I think why everybody reasonably isn't so sure about these tariffs.
Right. But the thing with China is probably the Trump administration seems more committed to a trade war with China than just the EU.
I do agree with that. More committed, yes.
And we'll see what happens with NAFTA, but that's a whole nother really topic.
Yes. And what a rundown, man. I feel like I've been through a lot. That's a lot of A lot to cover, interesting news. Please follow up if you'd like with any of the articles. These are all headlines on FreightWaves. JP, ready or not, here we come. Blockchain for babies, Nestlé to test blockchain tech on Gerber products. Big deal or little deal?
I think it's kind of a big deal. I think people are baby food is one of the things that people most care about the sourcing of and the provenance.
Reckless driving boosts likelihood of future crash and other findings from ATRI's crash predictor model. Big deal or little deal?
I would say it's a medium deal. Some of these things are obvious, but I think it's the specific numbers that matter. The way they're able to quantify the risk.
The future of electric vehicles lie in the sourcing of lithium and cobalt for batteries. Big deal or little deal?
It's a huge deal. It's ultimately going to impact, just the viability of electric vehicles.
Data standardization is the need of the hour in the maritime industry. Big deal or little deal?
It's a huge deal. We've been preaching the same message, the same sermon in the trucking industry. Pilot Flying J expands reach into oil and gas service. Big deal or little deal?
Little deal in the big picture, but big deal for tanker trucks in the little picture.
Amendment for another year of livestock ELD exemptions makes it onto the Senate spending bill. Big deal or little deal?
Big deal for ag haulers who just might be able to delay the ELDs another year.
UPS and Thor collaborate to test electric delivery trucks. Big deal or little deal?
Big deal for Thor, but maybe not as big of a deal for UPS, who's partnered with a whole lot of other companies.
Another Lawson lawsuit. John R. Lawson, Rockin' Oil, speaks out against carb regulations. Big deal or little deal?
Little deal with no actual filing, but big deal if carb gets sued by Lawson Rockin' Oil again. And that'll do it for the big stories this week. As always, we go into more detail about each of the topics we've talked about today on our website, FreightWaves.com. We will continue to publish this podcast weekly, so be sure to subscribe to What the Truck on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Also, make sure to leave us a review to let us know what you think of our new podcast.
And if you're interested in freight economics and finance, come to our Market Waves conference at the Gaylord Texan Resort and Convention Center in Grapevine, Texas this November. Visit marketwaves18.com to learn more about this event.
That'll do it for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week on What the Truck.